Okay. Well, that's the first time I've ever been asked that. So well done. I've been interviewed a few times. That's the first time somebody's asked me. I think when you work with people, you have to be responsible. You have to know what you're doing because they're people's lives. And all of my work was always frontline people delivery services. I worked for social services when I was young, and then as I was kind of growing, I moved into other services. So I've always kind of worked from the premise that if you're going to be productive and if you're going to, really kind of do your service well, then you will learn about what you need to learn about. So I kind of, education has just been part of my life. You can go to university and study 3 courses. I can go to university and study 3 courses. If you can't keep it real, it just doesn't work. Nothing works.
A huge project that you've undertaken over the last 5 years or so. Yeah. I'd really love to hear more about that for the listeners. I think they'll be fascinated by some of the things that you've been looking at, why you've been looking at, and the findings that you found, which people would just assume, no, that's not true. That's not the case. It's not going to be done like that, because my status quo hasn't changed, and therefore what you're telling me has just got to be some sort of gobbledygook.
Now, one of the contracts that I secured with a consortium, we had a consortium put together, and we secured a contract for £500,000 to create a whole family domestic abuse service.
On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Maloney podcast.
So, welcome everybody to the latest instalment of the Philip Maloney podcast. Today I am very pleased to be joined by Sally Anne Burris, who is the CEO of Split the Difference, CIC. So that's a community company. Community, what's the I stand for?
Community interest company.
Community interest company. Okay, so I've got to know Sally a small amount over the past few days, and I'm very happy that she's agreed to come along and join in this podcast. So with all the viewers, I hope to find out lots more about Sally and her endeavours within community work as a whole. So welcome Sally.
Okay, thanks ever so much. I'm really, really excited about being here with you. I've really enjoyed our conversations over the last couple of days. So it's really nice to be invited and to join you.
Yeah, as have I. So thank you. And without further ado, obviously we have some sort of mutual interests in regards to some of the chat groups and forums, etc. that we're on. I've invited a number of people to attend the podcast, and I'm hoping to provide a series of podcasts that focus around areas that you, in particular, champion and spearhead in a number of ways in regards to your work at Split the Difference. But before we get really into that, I was hoping to hear a little bit about you and your background. So I suppose, a good way to start is if you could tell me a little bit about, who Sally was growing up, what her sort of hopes and dreams were for this time. If you saw yourself here, or if you saw yourself in a different arena or what have you. But yeah, a little bit about the young Sally.
Okay. Well, that's the first time I've ever been asked that. So well done. I've been interviewed a few times. That's the first time somebody's asked me. Well, I left school when I was 15 and a half, and I went straight into a work, like a program thing. And I didn't like education. I hated it. I didn't fit in, didn't feel comfortable there. Thought I was just not somebody that could be educated. and I left and got work straight away. And then I got married very young, had 4 daughters. And then my daughters are in school age, and I suddenly realized computers are here and I have no idea how to work a computer. And I'm now responsible for 4 human lives I want to be doctors and nurses and everything parents hope for their children. And I ended up going back to college to learn how to run a computer, basically thinking, oh, I'll do it just for them if they need help and whatever. And I studied IT for a year, and then suddenly realized not only was I all right at learning, but I actually enjoyed it. And from there, I never stopped. And I ended up doing, I've got three qualifications as a therapist. I've got a business qualification, audit, lots of business management stuff, social services things, drug and alcohol. So I just never stopped, but it was always around the job I was doing, the job I wanted to go into, or the job I was doing to I kind of got this thing around, if you're gonna, I think when you work with people, you have to be responsible. You have to know what you're doing because they're people's lives. And all of my work was always frontline people delivery services. I worked for social services when I was young, and then moved into, as I was kind of growing, I moved into other services. So I've always kind of worked from the premise that if you're going to be productive, and if you're going to really kind of do your service well, then you will learn about what you need to learn about. So I kind of education has just been part of my life from about 28 years old, and I'm now in my 3rd year journalist degree, so it still haven't stopped. So wow. I know sometimes I think I'm crazy, but
well, there are people like that who genuinely have a a thirst for education and knowledge, and then I suppose just putting it into their own goals, really, what they want to achieve, just to kind of keep at that spearhead of what they're doing and legitimizing themselves.
Well, I mean, one of the I'm qualified as a psychotherapist, a life coach, and a restorative practitioner. When I did my psychotherapy, and I was practicing in a drug and alcohol agency, so I was working. I did a huge amount of hours in that project as a therapist, and I recognized there was things missing within psychotherapy that couldn't really tally with certain people who tapped into that kind of therapeutic intervention. So, and I realized what that component was, and it fitted with life coaching. So I went and I studied it. I studied an American course because it wasn't in the UK at the time. So I did life coaching, and I think there's always been a purpose to my education, but it definitely, anybody that kind of understands that when you work in people front services, you are often opinion of knowledge for somebody else, and if you want to participate in that, if you want to pass that knowledge on, you have to know what you're doing, because you're messing with people's lives if you don't. So and life coaching tells you that. It tells you, this is the thing around self-development, and one of the beauties when I did my psychotherapy training, and I was working through, I had a placement with the drug and alcohol agency, which I ended up being a therapist for. And one of the things that my clients taught me was that no matter who you are and what's going on in your life, if you are somebody who uses a substance, that is not all that you are. That is part of who you are, but it is not all of you. It doesn't define you as a human being. And if it does, it shouldn't, So the definition of us as human beings is that we should always be evolving. And if you hopefully you'll come to some wisdom within you that recognizes that actually, okay, I really messed up there. But that isn't who I am. I used to say to my clients, okay, that is part of your life. Let's talk about the rest of you. So who are you in relation to your parents?
The more nuanced human that's sitting in front of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think one of the barriers human beings put in front of themselves is they adopt an identity that's put onto them, by how society will judge them. Whereas if you're realistic about who you are, and you understand, okay, I had an episode of time when I was into some really heavy drugs, where I was doing heavy behavior, offending, and I'm doing that. But if we set that aside for 1 minute and we look at my relationship with my mother, my brother, my son, my wife, or my work colleagues, because I'm functioning, I have other identities to that, and let's focus on which of those identities are good for you. So I think education does that for you. And I think for me, I've never been in that position where I've had those experiences in my life, but I understood them.
Yeah.
And I've always understood that when you work with people, you really have to be responsible in that, and you really have to understand where you fit in that, because you are part of their identity. You are, once you step into somebody's zone, you're part of their identity, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah. So going back to the life coaching side of things, what was interesting to me there, and you sort of, well, I suppose you kind of touched on it a little bit, but it sounded like you were sort of just withdrawing ego from the process, taking out, taking out any expectations, taking out any of your own sort of thoughts, and really concentrating on the subject as a blank piece of paper. Is that fair to say in regards to that life coaching aspect of it?
I mean, yeah, because what psychotherapy can do for somebody is it can lock them into a moment. Psychotherapists will say, "No, Sally," and I will say, "Well, actually, I at that time, before I did my life coaching, I had over 500 hours counselling hours, which to a newly qualified was immense. I was qualified 3 years before I went for my life coaching. Psychotherapy has this thing around holding you in that moment and exploring your history, your past, and it does have elements depending on how you're trained and what skill set that takes you forward, but it does hold you in that moment a lot. And one of the things that, I mean, for everybody that I've ever worked with in that intimate setting, whether it's as a life coach or a psychotherapist, or whether I was using restorative practitioners in whole family work, whoever I've been working with, one of the things that has been a theme right the way throughout every single client I've ever worked with or environment I've worked with is that one of the fundamental things that stops people thriving is a lack of identity. Okay, it's the not understanding who they are, how they are, why they are. It's not understanding. It's not who. It's like, if you look at sort of, okay, if we look at somebody's using substance, they will, substance is a very negative thing within society. So how a person sees us within society or family, once you introduce that into your identity, it kind of can overtake who you are if you're not careful about it. Right. And what allowed a lot of my clients to have that was the fact that they'd had very negative experiences growing up, or it was very rare that I had somebody in front of me that just fell into drugs with no other history of harm or abuse, right, or anything.
Yeah, you don't just open that door. There's always something deeper sitting behind there, gremlins, skeletons in your closets, call it what you want. Right.
Or there's a lack of identity. There's a lack of strong identity that says, I'm going to say no to that. I'm in the wrong situation and I'm going to say no to that.
So what would build on an identity? I mean, where would you find, how would you recognize a deficit in identity? Like, what are the social aspects that would build that or
okay, so
diminish that?
Yeah, I mean, there are, I mean, I always look at life like it's a recipe. There's a recipe. We are a recipe. We're always living in a recipe of some sort or another. Okay. And the way that I kind of looked and worked with my clients was, I would say to them, okay, tell me about all the facets of your life that are in play right now. Okay. If it's harm that's being done to you or harm you are doing to others, tell me about that. Tell me about what brings you joy, what brings you sadness, what brings you frustration, what kind of pushes those emotional buttons for you, what makes you sit back in a chair, So I always wanted to know about their identity. One of the things that I noticed was The people that couldn't move on were the ones that bought into other people's identity placed upon them. They had a weakness in there. They didn't have a strong value based or a strong ethics in what they believed their life should contain.
Yeah.
And I think working on those components and allowing people to understand that there's missing bits to their belief about themselves, and what are those missing bits, and then it's a bit like a risk management task. I would look at people and say, okay, okay, you've got this big event that you've done that you're holding guilt for or shame or whatever else is in play in there. We need to look at the other parts. So looking at the other parts help them to see and compartmentalize to some degree that part of their identity, so that they could know it's there, understand it's there, and we work on it, but we would grow the other parts of their identity and build them to a strength.
Okay, so that must be very difficult to sort of prize out with people who do look towards any of the sort of society's negative perceptions, like drug, maybe sort of like promiscuity, violence, alcohol, what have you. So it must be very difficult for them to come to terms and accept some of these truths, would you say?
They're self-truth, those, these are truths born from their own self. I mean, I don't know about, because I know other practitioners may have something else to say about that.
Sure.
But for me, I mean, I've got a theme that says keep it real. We keep it real. I keep it real with them, and I invite them to keep it real with me. I have no judgment in play, and I only integrate judgment when they say, I want to look at this, I need to look at myself. So I say, okay, let's look at you then. How are we going to judge you, So there's a relationship that goes on. You can go to university and study 3 courses. I can go to university and study 3 courses. If you can't keep it real, it just doesn't work. Nothing works.
Yeah.
It just won't, because all you're doing is delivering a textbook. You've got to move with those nuances and know when to challenge and when not to challenge. And, there's certain spaces in people. People don't want you to own their pain. They want to understand their own pain, So there's these relationships that you kind of set up. So for me, all the work that I've ever done, all the services that I've ever delivered have been based on the fact that I have a belief inside me that somebody's identity, if somebody is allowing something to sit them down in their chair, it normally means that they don't know who they are right now, and they don't know where they should be facing right now. And my work has always been around, let's grow some skills about how you evaluate that. Who are you right now? What do you want to be right now? Okay, don't deny who you are. Turn around and face yourself. It's much easier than running. It's much easier to turn around and say, oh, I'm not liking that side of me right now, than it is to run at 1,000 miles an hour and duck and dive and avoid yourself,
Right. Yeah.
So all of my services and anything I've ever been done is based on, I believe you can thrive. Let's sort it out.
Yeah. Because otherwise people just turn into this sort of perpetual chaos, right? In many aspects of their lives, which probably draws us on to some of the areas of work that you're doing now. I know that we discussed in a degree of depth around a huge project that you've undertaken over the last 5 years or so. Yeah. I'd really love to hear more about that for the listeners. I think they'll be fascinated by some of the things that you've been looking at, why you've been looking at, and the findings that you found, which people would just assume, no, that's not true. That's not the case. It's not going to be done like that, because my status quo hasn't changed, and therefore what you're telling me has just got to be some sort of gobbledygook.
Well, I would love that to be true. I would really love that to be a reality. And then if that was the case, I'd be traveling right now, which is what I want to do. So yeah. I went through, I've worked with other businesses in lots of different guises, statutory, charity, agencies, private businesses. And then approximately 22 years ago, I started two businesses based on delivering procured services for the government. It's just the way my career went, and it took me to a place where I could do this for myself in the way that I wanted to do it, because I'm big on really positive, good outcomes, and I like measurable outcomes, and I like processes that work, and I like services that work. I like that kind of stuff. So about 22 years ago, I opened two companies, and I deliver procure services through those companies.
And this is for the Welsh government.
Welsh government, yeah. So the services one was supporting people, which I had contracts to deliver frontline supporting people services, different guises, people leaving care, prison. The people that were coming through our services were there for different reasons, but my support workers would work with lots of different things like drug and alcohol, child protection, debt management, myriad of services, but they were all things that were socially challenging for the community and the people that were, that we were working in partnership with to try and sort these things out for them. Or with them rather. And at the same time, I had a property management service that was offering temporary accommodation, so that the local authority could have stepping stone accommodation into my temporary accommodation. Then we would move people into permanent accommodation, and we're going through the homeless process. Now, one of the contracts that I secured with a consortium, we had a consortium put together, and we secured a contract for £500,000 to create a whole family domestic abuse service centered around the children. My remit was to part of what I brought was that it wasn't to be not gendered. It was a non-gendered service, because I had been working in partnership with agencies that delivered domestic abuse services. Some of the mums and dads come into my services that were experiencing that, and the children, and I knew that there was no non-gendered services.
Okay, so you weren't looking at specifically women's needs or men's needs. This was the needs of the children.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
Yeah, fundamentally.
Right.
The children were held at the core of that. So we won the contract, we designed the service. It was a licensed service. It's based on 30 years of heavily theory-based. It's manualized. There's a training package with it, and we currently own it. The organisation is called Restorative Change, right? Part of that, we were supposed to have received another pot of money to put it through an evaluation pilot. Police and Crime Commissioner pulled that money literally halfway through. Had I known that in the beginning, I would never have done this project, because to design a project and then not have funding to run a pilot is almost like annihilation and death. So you've wasted £500,000 in public funding.
Sally, let me take you back then. What is the process of this? Of this format, what's different about it? What happens now, and what were you planning to propose, or what were you what were you granted funding to carry out for the authorities?
Right. The requirement of the funding was that we created a therapeutic intervention that was centered around the children's needs. It had to be licensed and it had to be replicable. Okay. So, and whoever designed that was clever. They may not have known it at the time, but they were clever, because what they did was they gave us a remit that was to create a therapeutic intervention. Most of the interventions, well, I don't know any of them actually, that are therapeutic based. Okay. The interventions that are currently available for families are interventions that people who will have been, I don't know, social workers or whatever, they've been created by people who are not trained in mental health or specific kind of needs, children's needs, adult needs. And the idea was that the intervention the Police and Crime Commissioner, who particularly paid and funded for this, he wanted to roll this out into other areas. So the idea was that we would then have a licensed intervention that we could train other organisations to deliver that intervention. Now, what is in this intervention that's not in any others out there, and it still isn't, is that being centered around that when you have domestic abuse in families, currently in services, the only interventions that actually assist families and children block out men. and they don't integrate the father in that intervention. If they do, it's more on a policing kind of method. So lots of things that have been put out by Respect, for example, and Women's Aid and lots of other projects, they're all around the premise that the woman is always the victim and the man is always the perpetrator. Okay, this was not about that. This was around, and also those interventions don't give the children a voice. All right, they don't integrate the children into this process. There's an illusion in families. Any family that's going through domestic abuse, there is an illusion there that the children don't know. And adults and parents will say to themselves, oh, it always happened after or while the kids were in school, they didn't know it. When they went to bed. Children always know. Right, they always know. They always know when there is aggression in that family.
Animosity in the house or what have you, that atmosphere.
They can hear the shouting, they hear the crying.
Similar to dogs, right? Dogs know when they need to just kind of like stay under the radar. But something you just said there, Sally, I have to pick up on it because you're saying that as part of your remit, one of the things that you found were not considered was the father in that. Can you drill down a little bit on that for me? Because I don't understand fully. I think you were saying about the perceptions or what have you. My perception is that, or the wider perception is that if you look at domestic violence, then you have a perpetrator and you have a victim. What's wrong with that picture in regards to what your remit was?
Okay, so in regards to current services, if you look at current services at the moment are saying there is an assumption, a presumption that that where there's violence in the family, the perpetrator will be a man and the victim will be a woman. Okay, now everybody says, oh yeah, we know that men are victims, and then that's all they say. It's shifted, right? It's there. So all the services so if I'm a woman and I present to the police and I say to the police, I am experiencing domestic abuse, what happens to me is that I have a wraparound. Okay, I am offered accommodation straight away. I have the police around me. I have MAPA, I have MARIC, I have Citizen Advice of Women's Aid. I have an absolute wraparound service that will look after me and my children, as long as none of my children are male and over the age of 14. Okay, because any teenage boy, some are 12, any teenage boy over 12, some are 14. Okay, but if I've got teenage boys over that, they're excluded from this. Only young girls, me, but we're safe. Okay, right. So the remit for me as I present to the police is that I am protected, looked after. Anything I say is believed. There is an assumption that I am telling the truth. Okay. Now, if I was a man and I presented, I have to argue my case. Right? I don't have housing to wrap around me. I don't have hostile environment. I don't have these other additional services who are ready there to believe me, even if I'm lying. There's an assumption with a man who's a victim that he's lying straight away. So there's an assessment process men go through to prove that they are victims. All right. Whereas as a woman, whatever comes out of my mouth, I will be believed. Now, the current processes and services are in place are designed to exclude men, not to include them. Okay. Right. So the service that we created was a home-based service, right? It was an intervention that was therapeutic for the children and for the adults, perpetrators or victims. Now, in terms of anybody like me who doesn't have a bias in this world of domestic abuse, when I work with a family or I get into this setting, I understand as a therapist that domestic abuse, even if when a partnership begins, there may be somebody who has never known abuse in their whole life. They may not have been involved as a child. They may never know what abuse looks like in a relationship. But sooner or later, when they get into that relationship will be what we call bidirectional harm. Okay, so as human beings, when we get into this abusive kind of, because abuse in a relationship is it's got its nuances, and it becomes very complex. Triggers become complex. The way people manage and deal with things become complex. Our brains through abuse change, they alter, and how our responses and our behaviors out of that alter. And eventually, in every relationship that I have worked with, there becomes this position where it becomes bidirectional. So the harmer and the perpetrator and the victim, they become both involved in that harm. So I'll give you an example. I've spoken to women who've been harmed by their husbands, and they will come to me and they will say to me, I quickly learned when things were not getting right and he was going to blow, and I would poke him just to set him off, because then I was in control of it. So because this,
wow.
And this is because what happens is we get so wounded by abuse, right? We get so wrapped up in that abuse that there comes a point where we have no control, right? We have no control, but we know we will do things that there is this subliminal attack on this person that's harming us. It's never so clean as he's the harmer and I'm the victim. It never is in the end. And women have often said to me, I went out shopping and I stayed out an hour longer. I knew he wouldn't like it, but I did it anyway. Now, that is pushing, that is a softer element of pushing what you know to be somebody's boundaries. Yes, she got a right to go out and shop. Yes, she's got a right to shop as long as she wants to. It's her choice. Yeah. I'm not saying about that. But in the relationship, that person becomes somebody who is, in effect, she is harming the husband because she knows this hurts the husband, whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah, no. Well, so what I was going to say was, and what might be hard to understand is that unless you do scenario after scenario after scenario and case study after case study after case study, it's just an isolated incident that many people won't have much sympathy for in regards to that. So what did you call it?
It's called bidirectional harm. It means when the harm comes from both parties.
Okay, yeah. So it's like two people who are in a relationship choose to be in a relationship and can wind each other up. So it's kind of like I think most people would identify it as a normal family life. Almost. Don't want to take it down, don't want to belittle it or what have you. And it's a spectrum.
It is. Right? There's extremes to that.
Yeah, there's a spectrum of this where you have, a very low rate of perfection. Yeah. And you have a similarly low rate of severity, obviously the worst being homicide situations, and sitting in the middle there's a mass of I guess people who may be having a number of issues that sit in there. So that's what you're talking about.
We're talking about. And the reason I'm talking to you about this is because when you build an intervention and you don't understand that what a relationship has the potential to become, then you're never going to solve the issues for that family. You're never going to work with that family with the right type of toolkit to help them to get through that and get out of it the other side, and why we deny all of these nuances that are present, this bidirectional harm. I'm not saying it's always present. I only can speak about my own practice and the families that I've worked with, but I have chosen.
But the danger is in the ignoring.
Exactly. So if
the danger's in that bit. So where you take out the nuance, where you take out so it's call it a newspaper article, okay? So where you just read the headline and you hear this happened to me, if you don't read the article, you're never going to get through the nitty gritty of it, and it may give you an impression that actually that headline is exactly what it is. It's a headline. It's a snapshot of something which is, well, it's family life and it's human beings. So there is a nuance there that has to be considered.
Exactly. And I think when you've been in this as long as I have, and you've worked with the services and the different services and how they interact together, and then you understand all of that, and then you understand that all of the interventions that are currently available that we know about are focused on one element instead of all of that as a whole, then you're never going to look at it, and you're never going to, because what ends up happening is, if you don't agree and understand that bidirectional harm is in there, if you're fixed on this statement that there's always a perpetrator and a victim, and you're always fixed on that statement that is the man is more likely to be the perpetrator, the woman no, okay, you're never going to see this whole picture. And what happens to people, and I've seen this, and everybody who works in this field has seen this, people move from relationship to relationship, and the harm continues, and it also goes down through generations, from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter to great granddaughter, and it moves the cycles. And the only way that anybody can ever really look at that is to accept those nuances and to see this family in its reality, and it is a reality. I'm not saying what I've seen, I'm saying what women have told me. Women have said to me, I knew my husband was about due to have his blood because he had patterns of behavior. We do have patterns of behavior. I knew he was about to do that, so I've decided, let's get it over and done with. Now what she's not seeing, and what people are not seeing, is whether that man or woman is right or wrong as a perpetrator, that partner knows what harms that person. For whatever reason it is, they know that behavior will harm that person or make that person feel like they're being attacked. And if you don't see that, and you're not willing to recognize that, any intervention you put within a family is never going to really work. So when this contract came out, I instantly saw this was an opportunity to create a service that really would work,
Right.
And so we took it.
So sorry, Sally, but just to go back to that part where and I think it might be something that you'll probably come on to, where you've got a husband and wife, marriages don't always work.
No.
But another aspect of marriages are children.
Yes.
So where a mother and father might not hit it off, there's always a child who's the sort of the bottom of the triangle, as it were, who has a boundless, undefined love for a mother and a father in that scenario. So where I feel this might be going is obviously there's got to be a solution, not necessarily for mummy and daddy, and their relationship, but the whole family unit as one, bearing in mind those nuances that we spoke of. Please.
No, so the impact, so the way that the way the service, it might help for me to explain the way the service was designed. So people would be referred as a family into the service. Okay, now the definition of a family is the family's definition, not the service's definition. So it could be same-sex relationships, it could be, a husband, wife, male, female, married, not married. The remit's not. The children will be situated within this, so it's a whole family. So there will be children within it. Okay, now the family's definition of family could be that it's Auntie Maud who's lived next door for 30 years. You heard the arguments. She's not really auntie, but whenever anything kicks off, she's the one everybody goes to. So the family have a right to invite anybody who is relevant to this abuse into the family unit, and it can be long-standing professionals, it could be anybody. So they are then part of this intervention. Okay, now there is a child worker in place, so the child worker will work with the children. There's a therapeutic intervention that's one-to-one, and then there's group interventions. Okay, so there's a core of a service that's designed for the whole family, and then there's peripheral offers. Okay, so attached to this service, there's supporting people. So if the family are going through, I don't know, homelessness, debt management, drug and alcohol, there'll be a support worker to support them through those other things. because where stress is high, or there's a risk of losing the house or something like that, that just, that just contributes to this abuse that's going on, this violence in the family. So it's designed to be able to hold this family for 24 weeks. The family can repeat it, depending on the circumstances for the family. The family can repeat it, or can continue with certain aspects of it post the whole family unit. So the way it's designed is we work on restorative practitioners. There's the restorative approaches. There is there's no name, shame, game playing going on in there. It's just the restorative approaches, so needs based. There's also motivational interviewing in there, and there's some psychotherapy in there and coaching. Okay, so it's been designed.
Okay, so that's a nice wrap round of.
Yes, yeah. It was. I mean, the practitioners who put this together had been in their profession for a really long time. Were very recognised in the work that they'd done, and they contributed to this as a whole. So the children, the way this works is the outcomes that the family know that they will be working towards is that they will create together a family plan. Okay, so they always know that the end product will be a family plan. The children will work with a children's worker. The children's worker is specifically trained with children who experience abuse. And then you've got mum and dad, or mum and dad and dad. You've got the adults who are going through similar interventions. Now, this was built on a core that the family would either live violence-free or separate amicably, because they were the outcomes for the children. What's recognised through lots of other research is what the child needs is harmony in his life to thrive. It doesn't necessarily, although it's the best option, it doesn't necessarily mean that the parents have to stay together. But what it means is the parents still have to be there for them. So the idea was they would separate amicably, so that they were still holding the children to the core of that, or they would live violence-free. So the process, now that we run a pilot, after being dropped and not running a pilot, we run a pilot by getting the end of year funding from IFST, which is a social services department in Cardiff that deals with high-end need families who are taking substances, using substances, and also experiencing violence. So we ended up having 15 families referred to us. We ran a pilot. It was a paid for pilot for 6 months, but we ended up rolling it for 12 months to maintain continuity until the families had finished the processes they were going through. All of the children in this process were on the Child Protection Register. Some were at risk of being withdrawn from their parents and put into care. All parents were taking or using a substance, and all were experiencing violence. So we put these 15 families, we worked with them to then go through the processes, and they had some of the peripheral offers, which was supporting people type of, drug and alcohol, child protection, that kind of stuff, and homelessness and things like that.
So they're at the more extreme end of that.
They are at the
spectrum.
Extreme, they're the extreme.
But a pilot.
Yes, but it was a pilot. So we ran it for 24 weeks. At the end of it, because all of the children were on the Child Protection Register, they had social services input throughout that. The end results of this intervention was 14 families separated amicably. 1 family stayed together. Okay, their option, nobody else's. Okay, all children were taken off the Child Protection Register. All families, all children, which is massive. It's a massive thing for that to happen. The children, through the child protection process, which carried on throughout the whole intervention, the children became part of the family plan. So when the child protection meetings were taking place, instead of what normally happens in child protection meetings, all the stakeholders involved with the family, so education, GPs, doctors, medics, social services, the police, courts, whatever, CAFCAS, everybody involved in that family is part of that child protection. Okay, so what we were doing, normally the parents will go to those child protection meetings excuse me, and they will listen to everybody else organizing their lives. Okay, so all these professionals are telling these families what they have to do. okay, to
Yeah.
meet the requirements of the statutory regulations around child protection and all of that. What happened was, as the intervention carried forward and the child protection carried forward, the families were systematically creating their family plan. When the child protection meetings were happening, the family were taking their family plan to the child protection meetings, and instead of support workers and other people's talking for them, they were talking for themselves. And they were engaging with their own planning throughout our intervention. Okay.
Right. And the services were wrapping around those within a confine of certain parameters, obviously.
Yeah. So instead of the services doing to the family were actually engaged with this process and taking ownership of what needed to be changed, because their family plan that they were working through with qualified therapists was showing them what they needed to do. And instead of services telling them what they needed to do, they were telling services what they were doing in order to make their family balanced and to be harmonized, to understand what their requirements were. Now, in terms of children, the children's voices in that were that parents will, when there's violence in a home, parents will lie to themselves. They will say, my children don't understand, they don't know, it's all above their head. The children were given a real voice, right? So the children, through their children's worker, were putting their part of the family plan together. So they were giving their voice into this plan. And when we were bringing all of these components together, the children were talking to their parents and they were saying, I hear you when you're screaming. I hear you when you hit my mum, or I hear you when you hit my dad. I hear you when you're crying. I hear everything. I know everything. For a parent to listen to that is literally like being hit in the face with a sledgehammer. Sure. Because they buy into their own lie, they buy into the illusion, that they need, and they do it because they need to. They can't cope with that. There's a lot going on in the adult world. They can't cope with it, It
becomes a bigger reality.
It becomes a bigger reality. So when all of the illusions are stripped away and you only have the reality there, you have perpetrators who are looking at the outcomes of their actions. And they have that therapeutic intervention that's helping them to look at why they are behaving in that way and working through that and helping them how they can put blockers in their own behavior to not allow that to escalate. So there's lots of practical measures. This is where the life coaching comes in, there's lots of practical measures. I mean, restorative approaches is amazing as a communication tool. It's how you talk to each other. There's lots of rules of engagement within restorative approaches that are very, very effective based on needs. What do I need? What do they need? So these interventions, when they work together, had a profound effect. I mean, I qualified as a psychotherapist 26 years ago, and I've worked a really long time in this field in lots of different areas. Life coaching was approximately 5 years after that, and I've designed services, worked in them, and I was shocked by the outcomes. To take 15 families who are high-end child protection, and then to have them work through their own issues the way there's, and they're all off the child protection register. I mean, we had a lot of there was a lot of professionals, because when we created this, we consulted with a lot of people, police, right, child protection, health, education. We consulted heavily. We actually trained the professionals that would refer into us, so they knew what we were doing and how they could be the peripheral support to that family by understanding what the family was going through while they were referred to us. So there was a massive, buy-in with that. And then when you run a pilot, a lot of these said, oh, but you're trying to keep families together. We kept saying, look, please do not worry about this factor, because this is not what we're about. We're about empowering families to make decisions based on what their children need, and understanding that this is not a good relationship for them, or it is, and they're willing to make the changes to make it good for their children. And when you've got 15 families, all of the families that you worked with, all of them are off the child protection register. 14 have separated amicably, and instead of these children being dragged through Kafka's court processes where parents are arguing about who's going to see them, when they're going to see them,
lawyers, court processes,
all of that's done through this process.
You're not going to get what you want unless you
Yeah.
act a certain way, create a certain
Yeah.
scenario,
Yeah.
and make it, 100% your intentions and what have you. Yeah. So, wow. Okay. So that was your pilot, and what was it? Only a pilot? That is it, no uptake. How long ago was that?
This pilot finished in 2016.
Right.
In 2015, one of the catalysts for me doing the work that I am now is that event. Okay, that first succeeding in that contract, delivering that contract, and then piloting that contract.
Mm-hmm.
The outcomes of all of the people involved in creating that were all wowed by the outcomes. We were all of us,
How did you get the children to be so honest?
Because
normally children would sort of, I don't want to upset mummy, I don't want to upset daddy, or they'd have some sort of allegiance, or if they had a residency with a certain parent, how did you do that? How did you get that?
Okay, so the way that the service is created is there is a buy-in. This is not a mandatory service. This is a service that's offered to people, and they said, right, this is what we can take you through. These are what we are working towards. You're either violence-free or you're separated amicably, and it's easy on your children. Okay, so they opt to come into us. It's not a mandatory service. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is each person has their own support within that program. Okay, so each person will have somebody who is aligned with them, somebody that they know is there for the benefit of them, somebody they can call on when they need to discuss that with. The service is set up to have honest conversations at the level of the people that are involved in that. So on a child's level, we've got a children's worker who can have a conversations at the level a child would understand without causing, because there's this thing around reharming. You can re-traumatize a child, and you can re-traumatize an adult when you take them through certain interventions. So for example, some of the current interventions, perpetrator programs, those perpetrator programs are actually reharming those perpetrators, because what they're doing is they're integrating blame and shame in there. All right. We've looked at these models, so they have blame and shame. This program didn't have that. It hasn't got that. It has honesty, reality, the removal of illusions, and being able to communicate people at the level and the pace that they are happy to do that with. But right from the start, they know what the plan is. The plan is to create a whole family plan where there is no more harm and where everybody has the support they need. So that is a starting point. All right.
Okay, so whatever direction that comes from. So to answer the child has a social worker, and that is what sort of so parents are not a party to that, and that's what you were saying before, as they then deliver that back to the parents. That's very interesting. That's a very interesting way to.
So the child has a psychologically trained specific children's worker. All right, so they are trained children's workers. They know how to interact, how to build relationships, how to communicate at the level of a child can, regardless of that age.
Play.
Yeah. But they will always know in the child's language, So we here, because we want everybody to be happy in your family. This is how you talk to a 4, 5, 6-year-old, so they're based on interacting and communicating with that child at the level that they can cope with without re-traumatize them through the process. So it's not about creating harm. We were very, very specific about not recreating harm through the intervention, because that often happens. Okay, so and when you take all of this, all of these facets, all of these threads, and then in a staged, appropriate way for the family, you integrate these, then you come out, then you go in, then you come out, then you go in, then you come out. So there's a real soft but a definite plan in how to communicate, within that family. And it worked. I mean, those of us who are dynamic enough to understand that human beings are not all perpetrators or all victims, and to understand that history in our lives and our upbringings and the traumas we've suffered and the belief systems we operate by all impact on who we are in our family unit, and we were all people that were along in the tooth. We were all educated.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, so you've got your binary choice, which is it's black or white. There's either a perpetrator or a victim. And then there's that sort of more sort of grey scaled, and some people just don't think about the fact that two people once fell in love.
Yes.
Two people once fell in love. Two people once decided to be with each other. Two people once then decided to have a child and to raise that child. So there was, again, the nuance, right? There's a backstory to, you don't just all of a sudden become a victim and a perpetrator with 3 children, right? There's a lot to that.
I know. I agree with you. And one of the things, I mean, in my own practice, my own experience, one of the things, because my businesses, Steps, was heavily involved with child protection cases, heavily. I mean, my support workers were carrying at least 3-4 caseloads every week where their children were on child protection in some form with child protection. And one of the things that right from the onset, when I worked for social services over 25 years ago now, one of the things from the onset that I recognized was, as soon as a family becomes attached to social services and child protection teams in any context, really, that is when they lose choice straight away. And when you start looking in the realms of there's abuse in there, or there's an assumption, or there's evidence there may be an abuse there, suddenly you've got a number of services telling that family what they have to do. Nobody sits there and says, okay, tell me what's going on. Let's see what we can do to work through this. There's assumptions that there will be black and white. It's black and white. There's a perpetrator, there's a victim.
Run for cover.
Yeah. There's an assumption that the children are always going to be damaged by that. There's an assumption this level is a certain level. And so this family then is picked up on a tidal wave, and they are literally driven through services. It could be court, it could be CAFCAS, it could be child protection, it could be MAPA, MARIC, all of the services wrapped up with that. And nowhere in that is anybody saying, okay, what's going on here? What can I help you with? They come from this perspective that they're going to have to intervene, in the strongest way. So in terms of things like, if a woman says, okay, or a man says, my wife, I can't use, forgive me, I use women as a reference because men moving through services, it doesn't happen for men like it happens for women. So they're not a good reference, really. It's very hard for me to say that a man who is a victim will be treated the same way as a woman, because he won't have the resources around him. But in terms of a woman, and when she discloses and she presents that she's a victim of domestic abuse, that service will then tell her who she has to be, and it doesn't give her any options at all. It'll say, the police will say, your children are at risk, you're going to have to take action, so you're going to have to leave your husband, you have to leave the perpetrator. Social services become involved, and they'll say you have to go into refuge, or you're going to have to leave. What happens is, because nobody's looking at that family unit, they are taken on that journey. And then I, as a temporary accommodation provider, a woman comes out of refuge, she lands in my temporary accommodation, and the first thing that happens is she's back with her husband. Okay, because what's gone on is she's gone with what everybody believes that she should do. Nobody's actually said, is there any other way we can do this? She is basically in love with that person. Other people will say, he's the father of her children. So there's lots of ways that she's looking at this. She manages him. She manages the harm often, right? She'll end up in services because she's at a point where I really don't know what to do about this. School is talking, somebody's talking. She feels that she needs to react in a certain way. And as soon as she's gone through that process, she's in my temporary accommodation, they're back together. I'm finding them a home again. Or if she has followed through and separated from him, she's in a similar relationship. She is then quickly, before even she's left my accommodation, she's starting another relationship, and we're seeing similar behaviors. So it just does not work. It just does not work.
So that's interesting you say that. So there's a degree, there's a perception of care. But the care isn't holistic enough. Is that what you're saying? It doesn't even touch the edges of the actual issue, of the problem.
You have a family. You have a family who is coping with this abuse with an illusion in place. Children don't see me, children don't hear me. Okay, I can hide it from my mum and dad, I can hide it from my sister and my brother. The neighbors don't really know what's going on. I can hide all of this, so I'm creating an illusion. And then you've got services that are creating a similar illusion because they're only willing to look at, there's a perpetrator, there's a victim. Okay, the only options available is that we've got to remove the family from the perpetrator's environment. So there's another illusion. They're almost like two illusions that are bumping against each other, and none of them really work. What you need is a space where the safety and the risk is highly managed, and in this service they were. We worked by a risk management system that's integrated within the police and social services, but we went steps further than that to manage that risk, because this intervention was going on within persons. They're not separated from this. It was going on within their lives as they stood there. So we were very mindful of that. Some of the interventions, some of the conversations are tough. It's tough to hear your children say, but mum, I hear you when you hit my dad. I know you hit my dad. You're too strong with my dad, or whatever they're going to say. That's a tough conversation for somebody to then, our intervention steps out of that family zone, and then they are left within that unit. So we were very careful about how we manage that risk, who's on call for that risk, and when we deal with
that must
those
be a very
challenges.
difficult part of it, the managing of the risk, because it's where do you sort of where does your responsibility end when you manage risk? And I guess that's a fear within some of the systems.
It is a fear with some of the systems, and it's a blocker. It's a blocker for an intervention that works. For example, some of the female-based systems will say, oh, you can't evaluate that. We know this escalates. Putting an intervention in there like that, you have to remove the woman, you have to remove the family. They work based on that fear. Right. In actual fact, anybody that runs these services knows this. No matter how much you risk assess a family, when you walk into a family, we do a referral assessment process. Social services will do a very in-depth assessment process when they're working families. And you walk into that family, everybody who works in this setting knows you will only see the very tip of the iceberg. You will only ever hear. You have to work with families sometimes a year before you really know, in general terms, what's going on in that family unit. And why would you? It's none of our business. So it's the relationship you set up with them. So any risk management that you do, you're never really going to get to know what's actually going on. Even somebody, a man or a woman who's got a history of domestic abuse, if they're going into a new relationship with that abuse, the nuances of that relationship, you can say, yes, this person's got a history of violence, but you still can't measure. That violence may escalate in that relationship, or it may lie down a little while, you really can't say that. So the measurement of risk, the only really secure measurement of risk is based on, it is for us, it was consultation with police. It was looking at other referral systems that had been done, other assessments that had been done. It was more comprehensive that was currently being done by the police and social services and health and education. We really drilled down into those pre-assessments and based on the risk management. And then as we went by, literally interaction by interaction, that was revisited. And there was things that were put in place to capture families, to keep them engaged and to give them like safe points. There was like break safe points. So at the time, through these 15 families, we didn't have any issues, and these were high-end family needs. They weren't low end. And the risk, like I said to you, when the Police and Crime Commissioner gave us this contract, he gave us a stipulation on measuring that risk based on the police measurement. We went above that. Above that. We didn't accept that. We went above it. And we didn't have any issues that weren't managed. In actual fact, like I said, the outcomes were extremely positive.
So if you look at the which is an accomplishment in itself, and obviously, I guess one of the things that you're doing with your other foundation now, or sorry, forgive me, what was the name of the
Split the difference.
No. The other one?
Restorative change.
Restorative change. Okay, so the idea of that is to continue to gather more pace on that.
Well, what the reason why this is such an escalation point for what I'm currently doing is because my role was to take, because it was a licensed intervention, which meant that there was a training package. It's heavily manualized. There was a training package that was placed in there so that we could train other organizations to deliver this intervention. In terms of supporting the family and the service for 24 weeks, because of work we were doing, we laid the cost of running our service against women's aid services, to look at the comparisons between cost analysis based on what we were doing, how we were doing. And even though we didn't provide accommodation, but because I'd run the accommodation, I'd placed the cost of accommodation on top of that if we had to try and look at a more realistic comparison, and we were still cheaper in terms of delivering the service than Women's Aid was, and we had better outcomes. But so
why wasn't that just a no-brainer then?
Because I took my role, because I'm well networked in services and at different levels, statutory and all of that. My role was to take this into the service world and to say to people, this is what we're doing, this is what we've done, this is what the pilot has shown, and we can train team members to deliver this through your own services, or if you were a service that just wanted to do this, if you were somebody that wanted to be trained and worked in delivering this on a contract. And I was being blocked. I was blocked by women's services. Welsh Government had asked me to become members of different groups that were currently doing mapping exercises as part of ACEs and supporting people funding. There was a mapping exercise going across the whole of Wales, and Welsh Government, I was part of a consultative group that was putting together a process for perpetrator programs and accreditation with Welsh Government, so that whoever went for contracts had an accreditation level that was a good standard. So I was part of the group that was doing that. Welsh Government had asked me to become involved in other groups because of the intervention that we'd created, and these groups were currently being sponsored by Women's Aid, and they kept blocking me. They wouldn't let me. They would send me.
Why would they block you?
Because
why would somebody as caring and as compassionate as a charity organisation?
Well, because our interventions works with perpetrators, okay, and we're talking about in 2015, when we were at the time probably a leader in working with perpetrators to some degree in the whole family setting. Okay. And the model goes against every premise that women's services are built upon. All right, which is first, that is not gendered. It's not a gendered model. Okay, so the women's services are based on men are always the perpetrator, women are always the victims. Okay, the interventions are based on hostile environment, withdrawal. They're based on what we were doing were along the lines of, yes, this could work with medium, even high end. These were high end families, but having a service like ours that was pretty much a preventative one, that kind of said that you didn't need to exclude teenage boys from 12 to 14 and all of this sort of stuff. This went against their premise. So when they knew what we were doing, I was knocking doors to raise awareness with other police and crime commissioners and lots of other groups, and to find out that we were being blocked. There's a network in women's services in pretty much every service you can have in a community. So I got to a point where I was very frustrated by this. I'd worked in partnership with these organisations for a really long time in stepping stone services. And I got really frustrated, and I said, right, that's it, I'm done. And I thought, right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to climb over this service level kind of thing in the community, and I'm going to go above that. So I did a 3-month piece of research, which was to enable our Welsh Assembly members to meet with me, to understand what I was doing and why I was doing it, and to understand that this was a an intervention that fitted in with, actually, I counted up 15 acts of law. So there's strategies, there's guidance and strategies out of acts of law that are currently in place in Wales, England, Scotland and Ireland. Mm-hmm. And this intervention fitted in with 15 of them. Okay, so what I done was I did a 3-month bit of research, because I know how women's services affects our government, and how hard it is for politicians and civil servants to actually listen to these kind of balanced services. Mm-hmm. Because they're very much attacked if they consider that women are harmers, or that there's a whole family intervention that works, or that perpetrator programs can actually work and keep families together. Right. So I did this 3 months research, and I sent prior to meeting with 15 assembly members, I sent them this data saying, this is how this works, this is how it affects what you're working on right now, this is the outcomes of the pilot. I want to meet with you and talk to you about this. I want you to know who I am, what I'm doing, and what we're aiming to achieve. That 3-month piece of research took me into research I had never gone into before. And that was the most profound event that I have ever experienced in my whole career, because what it showed me was that it's not actually women who don't have equality in the UK. That's what initially it did. It's actually men. And I saw that by looking at legislation, the guidance that comes out of legislation, the policy and the consultation processes, the strategic planning and mapping that wraps around that legislation, and how that impacts on services. And by doing that kind of piece of research, I realized women's pathways into whatever they want to achieve are set. And they can pretty much find the door to open, and they're free to do whatever they want. Whereas with men, that's not true. In actual fact, it's men and boys. That's not true.
So in the confines of the family and these areas that you're talking about, it's heavily geared towards women in your findings.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So that research, because I've worked in. Do
you have any examples? Like what would be an example of that? What would be sort of a clear indication? So let's say you had a man, woman, they're both sitting on a level playing field, and all of a sudden, whammo, there's an issue, and let's say the first phone call goes to the police.
Okay, so a woman's journey, first phone call, she phones the police. My husband's abusing me, right? Police arrive. Okay, as soon as the police arrive, there's an incident. She will then be asked if she wants to leave, and she wants an intervention there and then, straight away. So if she wants to leave, she will then be able to go into accommodation immediately with her children. Immediately, okay? So if a man phones the police because he's been abused, and the police call, he will have to prove that he's been abused. A woman won't have to, but a man will have to prove that he is the victim. Okay. Now, he won't be asked if he wants to leave with his children. He won't be directed towards an agency that can give him accommodation straight away. A man's step from that will be that he will be homeless. If he wants to get out of that situation, he will have to be homeless, or we have to go and stay with somebody else, and he won't have contact with the children. So when a woman is the victim, she instantly will have a wraparound service, and the children will go with her. When a man is a victim, he won't have the wraparound service, and the children will not leave with him. Okay, the children will stay with the abusive partner.
That's a pretty succinct and clear example of certainly whether you call it a bias or just a difference, or just even a coincidence, or even just a societal perception as to how things should be fixed.
I know. So in terms of a woman, if if he leaves, if the police remove him from the property and get the locks changed and do all that, because the other option is the police will say, what do you want to, she'll say, I want to stay here, but I want him out. So the police will remove him as a perpetrator. They will help her to get the locks changed on the house, and then he's locked out. They put a marker on the property. If he goes near there, it's a done deal. If a man goes and he manages to persuade the police that he is the victim, all right, they will not force her to leave, and they will not leave the children there, and they will not change the locks on the house. Okay, so there's another scenario. Now, if he leaves and they change the locks on the house and there's incidents, right, the following day, the police will get victim support to ring her. Okay, and victim support is a check in this process. They will also ask if she wants women's aid involved. Okay, so she'll have victim support, she'll have women's aid. Depending on the level of the harm, if there's a real risk to her, she then may end up with MARIC or MAPA, which are their protective services, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
A woman can become 6 statistics when she reports, right? It is very rare for a man to become more than 2 if he reports, okay?
What do you mean by
he's
that?
Believed. Well, the way statistics are gathered, okay, so if I'm a woman and I present to the police, I call the police, I become a statistics. I'm a report to the police then.
Okay.
So in terms of statistics, will go to the Office of National Statistics, who then influences how much money is spent on services and whether people get what they need from the government. I become a statistic with the police. Then they refer me to women's aid, right? Or I'll get my initial phone calls off victim support. So I'll become ask if I want
Sally,
to go
you
to
just
women's
froze
aid.
there a second. Sorry. So you
sorry.
take a phone call to women's aid. You become a point of reference there. You become a statistic, number 1 on that tally chart for. Did you say the Office of National Statistics?
Yes. So for the Office of National Statistics, there are certain organisations that feed the Office of National Statistics. The police is one of them. Okay. So there's a police. So the woman will become the police. I'll become the police. Then I'll become victim support because they give a phone call as a next day. How are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll become women's aid, because if you experience domestic abuse, the only way to get legal support through this is if you've got an agency like Women's Aid supporting you. So most women do get attached to Women's Aid. So I become 3 statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the court process, what I choose to do then to move forward with my life. If my husband's abusive, then it normally becomes a court process because I've got children and we need somebody else like CAFCAS, right? Or somebody to be involved in this process. So I'll become the court's process. Then I'll become, maybe because where children are involved and the police are involved, and if people believe that the children are at risk, they will report it. They have a responsibility to report to social services. So I'll become another figure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just by going through these processes while they evaluate me and risk assess me with my children, I become one of these statistics. Now, because the belief system and all of our policies and our procedures are wrapped up in children stay with mum, even if she is the perpetrator, everything wraps around those statistics, and they're gathered and handed over to the ONS. So there's very warped statistics, in society.
So a female can move to a factor of 6.
Yeah, very quickly.
For one of it. And you're saying the male is a factor of 2.
Yeah.
Possibly. If he can prove.
Because he has to prove he's a victim, see? A woman doesn't have to prove, but he has to prove he's a victim.
Okay, so this is taken as sort of factual evidence and labeled as a victim, etc. And this is I guess, I mean, I don't want to say he's sort of like mistrusted, but it's, the perception for.
Oh, he is mistrusted. He is mistrusted.
Okay, yeah. So it's a case of that doesn't happen to you. This isn't an issue. So therefore okay, I understand. So that goes to the national.
Yeah, so the Office of National Statistics, when I did my research originally, the Office of National Statistics, they run from, they were taking their statistical evidence off victim support, the police, 3 women's aid groups, and the judicial system. So there was no men's groups, because there are no men's groups that those resources, those statistics are taken from, you see. So you cannot take what the Office of National Statistics tells you. I mean, I've spoken to frontline police officers, because I ended up doing 5 years research, and during that research, one of the things I did was I went to the police and I spoke to frontline police officers. I did it through a chief inspector who allowed me to do some research, and I actually spoke to them and I said, I need you to tell me, on a given week, when you go out to a domestic abuse case or call, I want you to think about those cases, and I want you to try to calculate for me how many you think are coming from the man as a perpetrator or the woman as a perpetrator. And I would get straight answers. Oh, it's 50-50. You know, these police officers, they believe it's 50-50. Yeah. Yeah, we did the same thing in one police force in England, and they said it's 75% the woman and 25% the man, which was very extreme. And I wanted to do a piece of research work with them. I haven't done it yet, but yeah, 75-25.
They're saying it's 75-25.
Yeah. One of the police forces was saying
woman to man, perpetrator to victim.
Yeah. But here
that is surprising.
The police forces I asked here said we believe it's 50-50.
Mm-hmm. So
I mean, when you look at the provision of services and funding in the UK, in terms of equating, currently 1 in 3 victims of domestic abuse are men under the ONS figures. Okay, so out of 3, 1 of them is men, and in terms of funding, men get less than 1% of funding in domestic abuse services, and the classification of domestic abuse services includes perpetrators, and the only real work that's being done with men is perpetrators. So the funding, though less than 1%, is going to perpetrator programs, not to victim services.
So the victim services are effectively non-existent.
Well, they're like so minuscule is beyond. There's a helpline run by Mankind. They're so poorly underfunded. It's criminal. It really is criminal, you know. And
but it represents a third of the issue.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the very basic national statistic.
Yeah. So the government is saying.
Why I detect that you have a certain mistrust to the Office of National Statistics. Why is that?
Okay, so my 3 months research led to a year's research in UK, right? And at the end of that year, around the end of that year, I rang the Office of National Statistics up and I said to them, because by the end of my year's research in the UK, I knew I'd be writing a campaign. Okay, I knew that I would have to do something to support men and boys, okay, in the UK. So I rang the Office of National Statistics and I'd said to them, I'd had contact with them because I'd been doing research and asking them to send me data over across different areas. So it wasn't just domestic abuse, it was health, education, there was lots of different areas. And they were part of, I was looking at, you know, the qualitative stuff of their evidence. So I rang them up and I said to them, I'm going to be writing a campaign to support men and boys. I know that the statistics that you're gathering are biased. You don't represent men in any way because you're only getting statistics that are women facing. So I want to gather statistics. I want to make those statistics real and evidence based. So I need you to tell me, how do I become accredited and how do you audit me?
Right.
Because I've run services, procured services, and I know that the Office of National Statistics, they influence what money's being spent, how legislation is grown, you know, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So my everything about business and procurement tells me that if I want to give the Office of National Statistics my statistics and evidence, then I would need to be accredited. So I would need to know how to manage these statistics, and I would be audited. I'm used to being audited by the government. And I spoke to somebody and she said to me, no, you don't need to be. We don't accredit and you're not audited. And I challenged her and I said, look, I'm really sorry, but I think you must be wrong, because the Office of National Statistics kind of influences how our country is run. So there must be a process of outcomes monitoring and stuff like that. And she said to me, no. I put the phone down. The day after, I thought, nah, I've spoken to somebody who's a new employee or doesn't know this part of the business or whatever. I rang back and asked to speak to a manager. I spoke to the manager, same conversation. She said the same thing. No, you don't need to be accredited and we don't audit you. And I said to her, I said, look, I challenged her stronger. I said, look, how can you not be auditing me? And how can you not be giving me guidance on how to gather those statistics? Because I could be anybody, you know?
Yeah.
And she said, and her words to me were, I'll never forget, she said, look, all you need to do is use your common sense. Right. And I said, okay, right. Thank you very much. I put the phone down again. And 2 or 3 days later, I had 2 or 3 days where it was like the Twilight Zone. And I thought, this is wrong. This is wrong on so many levels. These people don't know what they're doing. I need to speak to a top manager. I rang back and I said, right, this is my issue. I'm in the process where I believe I need to make a complaint to somebody. Can you please put me through to somebody who's at high level, who I can have a conversation, has been in the organization a long time and knows all of the facets? And they put me through and I had the same conversation and she told me the same thing. And I said to her, I'm writing a campaign in support of men and boys. And based on these 3 conversations and the way the ONS operates, you are part of the problem. And I want an email address, please, of who I need to communicate with to talk to you about this. And she gave me an email address and I emailed them and I outlined what I was doing. I outlined what was wrong with the system that they were operating. And I said to them, you are part of the issue and you will be part of the campaign, because I cannot believe that your evidence is ruling people's lives. You don't accredit the people that gather your statistics and you don't audit them. I could be anybody. I could be a women's service or anybody and feeding you anything, you know.
Well, worse. I mean, it feels worse than that. Is we're looking at, as you rightly say, the Office of National Statistics provide almost a safety blanket for legislation out to resources and to funding. Yeah. And compounding that, you're on a sort of 6-to-1 ratio for women's victim journey. Yeah. And you're on a sort of a 2-to-1 on the male journey as well. So effectively, no statistics are being put through in regards to men and boys, as you say.
No.
And a factor of 6 per woman is being put through unaudited.
Exactly.
Through to the national statistics. So
Exactly.
So where's the funding going? It's obvious. It's obvious where the funding going. So then you compound. So then you sort of correlate what's happening in the family services, social services, etc., the narratives, the training programs. Of course, something more holistic is going to fail.
Yes.
Something that encapsulates both, yes. Because, well, there's so much money to be made.
Exactly. I've spoken to actually high placed managers within women's services who have said, actually out in a meeting, I can't believe it was still said, she said, well, of course, Sally, domestic abuse is big business, isn't it?
Oh,
and left the meeting. I mean, you when you look at this,
how disgusting.
When you look at this in terms of the way the structure around society is designed only to support women, and you've got a structure that is not in place for men and boys, then, I mean, for me, the end of my first year, I knew that I thought the UK had just messed up. I honestly, after looking, because I'd explored the 15 pieces of legislation that actually wrap around men being able to thrive in a similar environment that women can. I explored those pieces of legislation, even contract law, because I couldn't understand how services were being formulated based on this planning or structure, and that contract law wasn't making sure that they were delivered in an equal setting. because human rights and equality is wrapped up in contract law. So when you procure services out, there's lots of mechanisms there that are supposed to make sure that this evaluation of need is done equally without any bias in there. So I even looked at contract law and how that integrates with procurement and stuff like that, and if you look at just look at legislation, it all looks like it's ambiguous and it serves everybody. But when you go into guidance and you go into actually before legislation's formed, when you look at consultation, who was consulted with to formulate that legislation, then who is consulted with to formulate the guidance from that legislation, then who is consulted with when you're looking at the services that are in that area, the need, identifying need, the people who can deliver those services. When you look at every single component within that to see how the end service goes into the community and then only serves women, and doesn't serve men. When you do that journey and you sit back in the chair and you think, oh my goodness, the UK's messed up. How is the UK messed up? How have we done this? And I spent, I would say, probably about 3 months-ish time after realizing that everything was upside down and the wrong way round. We're hearing women don't have equality, and then what I'm seeing is that within our legislation, guidance, all of that, it's men that don't have equality. In our services, men don't have equality. I mean, this started with domestic abuse. It actually doesn't finish there. I looked at health, education. I looked at family court. I looked at criminal court and the process within criminal court. I look at housing, looked there as well. I ended up looking at the areas. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which says that to be able to thrive and to be the best we can be within our environment, our family and our peers, we have basic needs that we have to have met, So I kind of looked around those kinds of needs because I reckoned if I could see whether the same footing was available for women and men, I would know whether equality was existing, And so I looked at, so the basic thing was, having a home. So is there equality in the services where a man or a woman can get a home, Is there inequality in services where both can access education? Is there equality in services around health? Okay, and wealth and well-being. So I looked at all of the fundamental things that would set a woman and a man in a position equally within their community with the ability to live side by side. Those are the services I looked at. And at the end of the first year, I realized the UK just has got this so wrong. It's unbelievable. And I ended up, like I said, I contacted the ONS and I ended up going to looking then internationally for best practice.
Okay.
So internationally, I wanted to see whether there was a country
where it was being done, where it's being done best, championed, etc.
Yeah. Which country's doing this good?
Equality.
Yeah, where's equality thriving? This is what I want to do. So when we put the whole family intervention together, we partnered with some people and consulted with people in New Zealand and Australia. So that was my first port of call. I looked at their legislation guidance and kind of followed the same thing, went down into service delivery, looked at stats and stuff. It wasn't there. Then I looked at, then I went to America. Didn't find it there. Then I looked at Canada, didn't find it there. Then I thought, right, let's have a look at where there's no money, right? So I looked at I went and I looked at Africa. And the reason I looked there was because I thought, okay, let's forget legislation a minute, because legislation, obviously something's wrong there. Let's have a look at societies, because sometimes where there's nothing, as in, there's no kind of formalized support and there's nothing. Communities do it good, communities do it well. Communities look after each other. So I said, let's have a look if there's any communities looking after. I found legislation there, very similar to the UK, about laws and family courts and stuff like that in developed parts of Africa. But again, couldn't find anything. I couldn't find, I looked at Arab countries. So I wanted
couldn't find anything, or you found a bias.
I found the bias. I couldn't find anything where men were treated equally, regardless of what you see on the media.
Right.
I didn't find any systems that supported men in the same way they supported women, even culturally.
Yeah.
because I found out a lot about cultures and religions in doing this journey, because I was looking for best practice. I genuinely wasn't looking for who's got it wrong again. I was looking for where I could find best practice somewhere in the world.
Right.
That's what I was looking for. And if it wasn't based on, governments putting best practice in place, it was communities putting it in place, where culture was answering that, or religion was answering that. I was trying to look for it somewhere, and I wasn't finding it. And then I looked at Arab countries, and then I ended up looking at some European countries. So there was I'd have to look at my notes, but it was over 15 countries that I looked at. Couldn't find equality for men anywhere. I looked at India. I looked at India as well, and I just couldn't find it anywhere.
Because, like, it's almost hard to hear, because my perception is that I'm not surprised, because women are oppressed all over the world.
No.
Right. But that's my, that's sort of like what society is telling me. If I pick up the paper, or if I go on the internet, there is a systemic issue with this one, which contradicts what you're saying.
What I did was there's a multitude of questions at each stage that I was asking myself. Okay. One of the questions was, what is giving this permission to exist? If you read human rights and equality legislation, right, there is no permissions in that legislation for this to be allowed. It's just not. If you read legislation, legislation is ambiguous to who it's serving. It serves everybody. So if you just read the legislative documents, the acts of law, then you will occasionally see women and girls mentioned, where you will not see men and boys ever in legislation. But when you go down into guidance and policy and strategic mapping, consultation processes and all of that, you will see where this bias then kicks in. It kicks in underneath that radar. Right. I asked myself questions. Okay, what is giving this permission to exist? I wanted to know what in society, world society, was allowing this to exist. And the only thing that I could look at was the governance that surrounded above all of these governments, because there was so much I was seeing that was the same, even similar terms of reference, so I mean, in terms of domestic abuse, abuse is gendered, right? So that's a UK term, violence is gendered, these are UK terms. So, but I was hearing those terms everywhere else. I was hearing them in America. I was hearing them in Australia. So there was a shared narrative. So I shifted then. I thought, okay, where's this shared narrative coming from? Is it media? But we're talking about legislation and guidance. So look for that, Sally. So I ended up looking at the United Nations, because it was the largest overarching organization that exists in the world. We have the EU and we have other kind of smaller groups, but it was the largest existing overarching organization that influenced equality and human rights. And in that, that's what I found it. I mapped then. I could see language, terms of reference, guidance on formulating these, where pieces of work had been done by the UN to influence it. And
so that message and that narrative essentially could only reach globally through the UN.
Yeah.
Because you just couldn't have a situation where
it's no other ways.
Yeah.
You can do this. Can you, I don't know if you edit, but do you mind if I turn the light on for you? My end.
Yes, of course.
It's only because
1 hour 34, I can edit it. I just hold that up and then go for it.
Okay, just because otherwise it's hard for you. I'm trying to struggle with this light. So sorry about that.
No problem at all.
There you go. I should have turned it on for you in the beginning, and I can't believe I forgot. I should know better.
No problem at all. Well, it's been fine. It did get dark there a little while ago, but it got better.
Yeah, I managed to rescue it. I'm so sorry. I should know better.
No, that's okay.
I've got a proper kit here. I could have set it up. I got a proper journalist kit. Anyway, go on.
Okay, I'm just going to pop this back up. This is kind of my cue card. Okay, so you found out in the UN or you found out that it sort of lays at the feet of the UN, this global narrative.
They are the commonality between all of these countries. And when I started looking at the United Nations, the directives that were coming around, from them around each country, you can see the pathways, how it threads out. You can follow it pretty much. So they've got specific guidance around human rights and equality. They've got guidance around education, in different countries. They kind of a host of a massive amount of guidance that is, and you can map their guidance coming into like UK legislation. So they are the common denominator. They are the commonality between all of this human kind of responsibility, if you like. So I then ended up doing in total, on top of that, I did another like 2.5, nearly 3 years research, looking at all of these countries, looking at how, the 6 committees of the United Nations works, how they kind of run the United Nations, basically, how they feed into that. Read lots of research they've done. Lots of evidence they've done, what kind of influenced the statistics and stuff like that around health, education, and things like that. And I guess to some degree, I was evaluating the United Nations. I was evaluating how they are in influencing, these kinds of things. And I had in year 3.5, in kind of like around year 3.5 to 4.5, I was really angry, very angry. And I don't get angry, I think I was angry that I didn't know this stuff a long time ago, because I've been delivering services for a really long time. I've created services. I've worked as a chair for Welsh Government. I've worked as a critical friend to one of the local authorities. I felt I should have known this stuff. And why didn't I know this stuff? Why haven't I seen this? And then you get, as a person, there's a term called the red pill. I know there was a very good documentary film that was made.
Yeah.
And I believe the term came before that from The Matrix.
Take the red pill, go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. So I kind of experienced that for about 6 months, because one of the things is it's a real shock as a professional, as a person. So I get it when people are saying, no, don't be silly, and I get what you're saying. But when you realize, when you get to that point where you think, oh my God, how can this be? That point is a real shock to you, because, and lots of people will tell you this, because you look at the world and it feels like the world that you are now seeing most definitely is not the world that you've been living in until this point, and everything you see around you is different. Okay, because you start to know and understand that in actual fact, all of this narrative that says that women are victims and suppressed and that is actually not true. It is men who are victims. And I can't stand that word. I hate it with a passion. But it is men who are suppressed and who have difficulty in thriving or having their needs met, and when you realize that, it's hard. It's really hard.
Toxic masculinity.
Oh, rubbish. I've never believed in that. That's not. I'm a therapist. That doesn't exist in my head.
Yeah.
And I mean, these are terms of reference that are utilized to push the argument forward and to continue the narrative. But that's rubbish.
So one thing I want to ask then, Sally, like when you looked at the UN, I thought you might come onto it, but who influences the UN? Why would the UN as an organization adopt a global narrative to oppress men?
I think the reply to that, one of the tasks that I did throughout this was I looked at the feminist movement, right? I've never liked being called a feminist, right? I am Sally, I'm a woman, right? This is my take on it. I've never liked this term. I've never felt the need to fit into a box of any nature, I just never felt the need. But because obviously my research was showing that there was a very energized extreme feminist movement wrapped up in some of this these stuff, and I call it stuff because there's nothing else I can say about it really, but So I looked at feminism. I went back to the 1600s because the feminist voice is about women always being suppressed and all of that. So I wanted to look at history way back when, history about, okay, how long's women been living through this oppression? And then I looked at the history around where the term feminist come from. It was actually from a French, for want of a better word, philosopher idealist in 1846, I think the year was. He coined the phrase feminist, and he had a belief that that societies can only thrive when men and women are influencers within it and decision makers within it. So, and he coined that phrase. So I looked at that. I looked at the pathway that took forward. I looked at this 1920s movement and where were men in that time? Where were men in the 1846s? Where were men in the 1920s through the stages? Where were women through those stages? What did the working life look like? What did family life look like? I really drilled down into this stuff. And then in that research, and I was still looking at the UN at that point, I started to recognize that there's an extreme feminist movement that is actually internationally connected, and very strongly so through business networking groups, female business networking groups, female education groups. They are influencers within. So, for example, in the UK structure, one of the things I noticed in the UK research was that each police and crime commissioner's office, all right, is like it's an organising setup between the community and the police, right? And the idea is that they are, I mean, for the want of a short, better description, basically the police and crime commissioner, they are somebody that holds the police to know that they have to protect and work with the community. So they're like an arbitration kind of, what do the services need? What do the community need that include the police in it? And what, it's that kind of thing. So they sit there. So
they influence the remit.
They do, and they can challenge the police, and they influence spending in services within the community where the police are involved. So community spending and stuff like that. Now, one of the things I noticed on a mapping exercise I did was that all the police and crime commissioner services that I looked at had either co-located women's aid workers or ex-women's aid workers working within those departments. Okay, so when you ring up and you say, I want to speak to somebody about domestic abuse, you will be put towards a woman who's either working with women's aid, is an ex-worker of women's aid, or is a supporter of women's aid. So as a man phoning these agencies, you haven't got a chance. But as somebody, as a body that is an influencer between the police and the community and the community services, okay, because the Police and Crime Commissioner influences how health services and housing, it's part of a community planning group. So having women's aid or ex-women's aid workers positioned in there, there's a massive influence around women's services. So when I noticed this, I started looking at police stations. I started looking at housing departments. I started looking at child protection departments. I started looking at the governance above them and where are these highly feminist, extreme women situated within all of the layers and levels between that. Okay. And in every area I looked, they were present. Okay, and to some degree, what I also did is I looked at the history of the women who were now in a high influential position. So looking at assembly members, MPs, looking at I looked at housing, for example, because that's a huge thing, is housing and things. And then I went, okay, this is the country. This is what's happening in the country. They're in court processes, CAFCAS, I mean, everywhere. There is an element of these ladies. And then I thought, okay, we've got that level, let's go above that level. So I looked at the hierarchy. Then I thought, okay, let's go above that level. And then I looked at countries. So I looked at services similar in America, and I looked at Australia, and I looked at, are these connected country to country? Okay, so they're connected in many ways. They're connected through the United Nations women, UN women. We have a UN women, but we don't have a UN men. Okay, we have a minister for women and equalities, but we don't have a minister for men and equalities. Okay, so I was looking at all of these kinds of stacks. So recently, my most recent, and I'm still doing that piece of work. Last year, I watched 4 days of parliamentary TV because I was mapping the consultation process of the domestic abuse bill. So I was looking at how the domestic abuse bill has been formulated, who's involved in that, what processes have they taken to ensure there's equality in there. And I read the guidance around consultation. I revisited all of that stuff because I'd looked at it 5 years ago. And what came out of it, I then sat and watched 4 days of parliamentary TV, literally Friday to Monday. I was stuck in there downloading parliamentary TV. And one of the things I noticed, the parliamentary committee, right, that is running the domestic abuse bill at the moment, I'd found that they did a consultation process where they put the advert out there and they invite stakeholders, which is what they're supposed to do to contribute to the consultation. They had women's groups, women's aid and styled groups who had applied, and they had individual women survivors who were speaking about women's needs, and they'd applied. And then they had the equality, they had men's groups and they had male survivors. I know I spoke to some of them. I rang them and said, did you fill out the paperwork? You know, and individual people, I put a call out there, who has filled in this paperwork and submitted it to the Domestic Abuse Committee. Now, what we know is that they only accepted women. They accepted no male groups, no male survivors. They only accepted women's groups and women survivors, right? So I thought, that's wrong, right? That is absolutely wrong. So that's why I sat down and watched the TV. So I watched.
So that and that's coming also from the fact that there's at best a 1/3 ratio for women. So the 1/3 being women to men domestic violence issues. So a third of the perpetrators are women, and as you say there, the domestic violence bill, a domestic abuse bill going through Parliament, being discussed, etc., that you watched 4 days of, had no representation from men whatsoever.
I spoke to the groups that had applied to be part of the consultation process, and I spoke to a number of men who'd also applied to be part of the consultation process.
Right, okay.
All of them had been denied. Even some that are long-standing organisations who were very well known in this field were denied to be part of the consultation process. Okay, so when I found this out, I thought that I've got one option. I have to watch this consultation process. I have to see what happens in there. So I sat down and watched it for 4 days. And what became very evident through watching this is that the committee members who are part of that committee, all right, when they were interacting with the women who were giving the evidence, the women's groups, all of the women's groups, the women in that consultation committee, in that committee, all showed and referenced past history with those female domestic abuse groups. So the people on the committee had a pre-existing relationship with the women's groups that were giving their evidence about what the government needed to do.
So they're looking at it from a, not only are they, so they're looking at it from a point of view as like they've been affected by it, they've been victims of something, so they couldn't possibly have a sort of like a clear blank canvas view or approach.
No, there's a conflict of interest. You know, anybody that knows services, if you've denied access to a consultation process to men who are a third of the population who are experiencing domestic abuse, and then part of the matrix, that, you know, part of your committee members, all the female people that I watched in that committee were given reference to historical projects they'd worked with women's aid with, you know, so they talked about things that they'd, you know, one was mentioned reference lobbying that she had done with women's aid. She was on the committee, but she had lobbied with women's aid in women, getting women's services. This is a conflict of interest. You know,
quite obviously.
Conflict of interest. So this to me is gross misconduct. And it needs to be challenged. You know, so
well, it's I mean, it's a massive thing. How to challenge something so, I mean, if this is almost like a cancer.
It is.
It's almost like a cancer as to what you're saying, with regards to there being women's groups throughout. You know, even if you look at sort of, if I go to my post office, I can almost feel like there's a, from what you're saying, that red pill moment. You now look at the world completely differently.
That was, do you know what? I know this, if you got to know me, you'd realize that I'm an extremely balanced individual. Okay. I don't believe, I genuinely believe in equality and human rights, and I genuinely believe that everybody has a right to thrive and to make a choice. You know, I mean, it's so deep rooted into me. It's like it's programmed into my genes, you know. And I am I don't, as a therapist, I before I was a therapist, I never got involved in other people's pain. You know, I have empathy and I can feel where they are, but it's their pain and it's their right to work through their pain. So I don't kind of get involved in stuff on an emotional level. No, I don't. And it's not that I'm heartless. It's because I look at people and I think, I'm really feeling you right now. But what I know you need from me is to remain balanced. You don't need me to crumble onto the floor with you. What you need is somebody to sit beside you and just listen. And I've always been able to do that. But that red pill moment, so to speak, actually, I spent about 6 months looking at situations and bursting into tears over stupid stuff. I sat next to a woman. I've told you this, I think, before. Forgive me repeating myself, but I went in a coffee shop and sat down next to a woman and her friend in a coffee shop, and I was drinking my coffee and I could hear them talking about their husbands, and the tone by which they were using, and you know, just putting them down. Oh, you know what men are like, and you know what this is like, and you know, that kind of thing. And I had to sit there and I was literally actively saying to myself, Sally, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything, you know, quiet now, Sally, don't say anything, because I wanted to turn to them and say, did you know? I wanted them to understand that actually what you're fitting this man into is a society that he's had to, and the awful thing about this is men don't realize that what this is, they genuinely don't realize, because they've also bought into this, you know. A man will assume that he only has to knock on the door and the help will be there for him. He doesn't understand that when until he knocks on that door, it's not there. You know, that's when he understands, you know.
The world collapses around him for those sort of expectations. So there must be and I think you sort of touched on this in our conversation, but if you could explain to me how this is actually counterproductive for women.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Absolutely. When I went through this year of looking at, and this is one of the things I was kind of hoping you'd ask me, when I looked at the year, when I was looking at feminism, you know, and I was looking at women and their identity in their families and the community. And I mean, I've been in this, I reflected on myself for a little while in that, you know, I've been working since I was 15 and a half. And even when I wasn't educated, I never felt or met any barriers, you know. So these barriers, I've never been able to see them, which is why I've never been able to say, I don't need to be a feminist, you know. But I always used to think maybe there's barriers that I don't know exist, you see. So I've always erred on the side of caution. So, but when I was looking at this feminist movement and I was looking at, I don't like this term ideology, but I deny it because I don't like the fact that it's real. It's an ideology. It's and I fought against saying that word a lot, and I still fight. I don't like it sticks on my tongue because I don't like saying it. But what I found was that you've got a group of women who have picked up this banner that says I'm a feminist, right? I get it. I'm a feminist. I'm in the group, you know. I'm the girl guide.
Yeah, it's cool to be a feminist.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm in the group. I bought into this. Right, what am I going to do in this group? And they move forward with this premise, this ideology that they're suppressed. So when whatever environment they go in, they go ready. I'm ready. All right, where am I suppressed? Who have I got to fight? Okay.
Yeah.
But you've got what I've seen with this, when I looked at this overarching female movement that's connected from country to country, and it is, I noticed that there is a group of women that literally use this untruth, all right, to step on other women and turn them into victims to achieve what they want to achieve, which is power, control, or wealth. Okay, so and
That's very interesting.
it is, and when, as a woman, I mean, I've now, in that year, I had lots of conversations with women at lots of different levels. Women who choose to stay at home and be housewives, women who are at the top of their career and they literally have got nowhere else to go, only change career pathways. That's the only other option, because they are right there at the very top, you know. And I've talked to women from all these different avenues: health, psychology, engineering, the gas fitter. Okay, the builder. I spoke to a carpenter, right, a woman, and I've spoken to all of these women, and I've said to these women, okay, when were you suppressed? When did you have a barrier? Talk to me about your barriers. And not one of them could tell me about their barrier, because there are no barriers. Okay, and and all of these women, the first 2 years of the campaign was Split the Differences. Did you know? And all of these women, I said, okay, I want to tell you something. Did you know? So I gave them statistics. I said, did you know this is how many men are abused in the UK, but there's no services, and lots of stats around that and what the storyline means. I said, did you know there's a UN men, but there's no UN, a UN women, but there's no UN men? Did you know there's a Equalities Commissioner for women, no men, you know? So lots of did you knows, and even to the point where, you know, did you know that your health screening is automatic for cervical cancer and breast cancer, but a man also has cancers related to him being a man, but he doesn't have automatic screening. It's only when he presents. So did you know that? Did you know 25% of dropouts from university are more likely to be men? Did you know 89% at the time of homeless people are men? You know, so lots of did you knows all the way along.
Suicides, I guess, is a real problem for men.
Suicide is massive, because in the UK it's 2 out of 3 suicides are men or boys, some of them younger than 10. Okay, but I did international research, and in every country without exception, not one single country is different. All the suicides are higher. The lowest level is 2 out of 3. There's a couple of countries that are 2 out of 3. Some countries go up as high as 5 out of 6. So 5 out of 6 suicides in a country are men. Now, the United Nations has these statistics, right? They are correlated by agencies that work as a contributor to the United Nations. They know these statistics. Now, one of my things is, if this was female statistics, there would be an absolute international outcry about what's going on, you know, but we don't hear this, you know, we don't hear nothing.
It'd certainly be more prevalent, right? And organized and agile, and with the ability to sort of, you know, to reach, it'll be far reaching.
Well, I mean, we've got examples there. I don't want people to pin me into domestic abuse, because we've got 13 areas on the campaign where there are strong areas of inequality for men and boys. But if you look at domestic abuse, there has been some research and work that was done on domestic abuse that influenced all the policies in all of the countries you're seeing now. That is female orientated research, right? Now, if that was done on an international scale, because it was an international issue, right? So that's why it was brought into this realm. Now, having that quantity in every country across the world of men who are committing suicide, and we're talking children younger than 10 years old who are killing themselves, right, boys, and not doing something about it, you know, just that in itself shows where the position of what society looks at in terms of men.
Well, something's not working. It's not working.
What I know is, right, that there is a narrative that everybody's bought into, even men, right? Even men have bought into this narrative that women are suppressed and they don't have equality. Okay, and that narrative is just picked up like it's passed from person to person.
Sure.
And what I know is that when I've spoken to everybody that I speak to, when I tell them the statistics and the evidence, and I always say, don't believe me, don't listen to me. It's not my evidence. It's evidence that's out there by people, governments, and all of that. Check your evidence out. Everybody says to me, I can't believe it. Just don't stop. I can't believe it. Women say to me, don't tell me about extreme feminists. I can't stand the fact that they step on me to climb the ladder. I'm not a victim. You know, this narrative is
Yeah.
quite present in women who
I
are
think that's
balanced.
sorry. Yeah, I think it's really profound, that lovely little soundbite of what you said around women using other women to
Exactly.
drive themselves forwards. So it's so true.
I know
It's
it
so
is.
true. I mean, you see it all the time. You're cajoled and you're bullied into being and behaving in a certain way, but being hoodwinked
Yeah.
for somebody else to just leapfrog you and,
I know.
get more numbers, get another 6 numbers,
Yeah,
6
exactly.
numbers on that sheet, more
I mean,
funding into that, and then the bigger picture. And they're probably quite naive in doing that as well, because there's probably a management structure that's pushing that pressure
absolutely.
down.
Absolutely. Currently, you've got a number of things that are influencing that. The UN Women is a big one. It is a big one, and because that the UN Women is integrated into every country that's part of the United Nations. If you type in, just to do a general type in, you type in equality in Africa, you will see the UN Women come up straight away. If you type in UN equality, you'll see the women's page come up. You won't see equality, you'll see women come up and everything. You know, if you type any search in with equality, it's all about women.
A sort of ironic bias through your search.
It's a systemic issue. The unfortunate thing is that you've got men who are predispositioned to be protectors. Men biologically, mentally, emotionally are, and I know this is generally, I'm making general, but we know generally
that's a
men
masculine
are.
trait.
Yeah,
That's
it's
a genuine fact. Yeah,
it is. It's part of the male identity. So when you've got that in play, all right, and then you've got this thing where you've got a society that's governed by women who are saying we're being suppressed and whatever, men are straight away going, right, who am I going to fight, or where do I need to back off?
How do I fix it?
Yeah, how do I fix and fight it, or how do I back off, right? Because that's the responses you get, you know. I got to back off from this because this woman's feeling vulnerable, and I don't want to, I don't want her to feel vulnerable around me. Or who am I going to fight? What have I got to put right, you know? So that having that in play, right, and men not understand, because men don't know that these situations are in place. The men don't know that they don't have equality. Women don't know that they have more than men. They just don't know, because all they've done is bought into this narrative.
Constantly.
Yeah, they just bought into the
you
narrative.
Don't have it.
Yeah, they bought into the narrative. So the idea of the campaign is, did you know? And for the first 2 years, it's did you know? So I'm working on that currently. It is hard because it's like me funding it, and and it is very difficult. But
well, I would hope that this podcast goes some way in spreading that message. And I also have a series of other podcasts that are lined up over the next week or so with different people like-minded like yourself, who are either sort of victims of this area or areas of it, and other people who have very sort of similar roles in society as yourself, as campaigners, etc. But Sally, I think where are we? We've just gone over 2 hours of conversation, which
I'm so sorry. I know.
No. Which felt like 15 minutes. And it also feels like we haven't even really. We've done a high level overview of your work, and I'd very much like to speak to you again. As this evolves and develops. And yeah, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to say? You'd like to?
If I was going to.
Do you have a brief promotion around what you're doing?
Yeah, currently I'm trying to raise unfortunately, there's no funding for men and boys.
Mhm.
Forget it. Okay, there's no. Because I'm used to applying for grants and procurement and stuff like that. Forget it.
Yep.
There's none out there. I'm currently funding this, which is very difficult for me. And it's international. It's an international front-facing campaign. I mean, if you want to see the launch letter that I sent to the United Nations on the July the 1st last year, you can see all of the points on that. You can go to our website. We're always looking for people to help, because it's not a funded. I'm just not going to have it. We're trying to set up like self-funding. So I've got a small shop that sells T-shirts online, and I'm going to set up an Amazon shop and trying to make an income so we can be sustainable,
Yep.
because it's very expensive to do what I do, and I have to pay people out of my own money to be able to do the jobs I do. We have a couple of things that we're doing right now. Is if you go on my website, for example, you'll find a letter there there's Minister for Men. We're currently asking people in their own districts to download the MP's letter, to fill it in, and to hand it to their MP, because we're asking for a Minister for Men. Okay, we're asking that there's a Minister for Men in place so that men have a representation of their needs actually within the government. All right. So, and the only way we can do this is if people download the letter and they sign the letter and they send it to their MP. The guidance is there with the letter, so you know what to do. It literally takes minutes because you can email it to them and just have a follow-up phone call one day and say, I've sent you something in. Can you give me some feedback on that, please? That literally takes 10 minutes of somebody's time, but it means a massive thing for men.
Yeah. Yeah, I think moving through those sorts of ways, like for your MP, etc.
Yeah, and the other thing is I'm currently targeting the United Nations to have a UN Men, because one of the things is we need men to have a voice. You see, they don't have a voice at the moment. There's no space for them to sit to say, look, we need to look at this. We need to look at suicides for men across the world.
What real equality looks like.
We do. We need a man to stand up. And one message to your audience: if you're a man, please check out what you need to know about what's going on for you, and please, talk to people. I say to men all the time, please, if somebody approaches you and challenges you just because you're a man, can you just turn around and say, well, actually, can I tell you something for a minute? Actually, it's hard work. I work hard, I work for my family, and actually that's not who I am. So whoever you assume I am, that's not who I am. Then turn your back and walk away and leave them, because we need to switch people on to think about men in a different way. And any ladies that are watching you, please do not buy into anybody's ideal. Don't buy into me. Check me out. Don't listen to me.
I think you're a good representation of telling that story. I mean, I'm sure in a very biased way, if I was sitting here talking to a man about this, people would go, yeah, sure. But
I know.
I mean,
a lot of women, there are a lot of female professionals who have actually witnessed this now. They're turning around and they're saying, I mean, for me, I shouldn't be here. This should be a man sat in my chair. All right. You should be sat here, not me.
If it was true.
Yeah, you should be sat here, not me. You should be having your voice and having this conversation and being allowed to do that, right? And noticing this. But currently, men are afraid of doing that, So the women like us, there's a term that goes around with women like me who are professionals and trying to target this, and they're saying, we see our role as just reining in our crazy sisters, so the ladies who don't know this stuff yet and who need to know this stuff yet and have an opinion that's based on illusion, ladies, please check it out. Don't buy into somebody else's voice.
Wow.
So,
Oh, Sally, it's so good. I mean, it's been a real pleasure and a real joy speaking with you about this, because it is really, I mean, it's great to know that there are people out there who are doing that. And I would encourage all of my viewers we're going to put all those details in the feed, and I think during the edit, what I'll do is I'll get you to send me the links and things like that, and I'll scroll them up on the screen as we're talking about them. And yeah, sure, I'll put them in the actual description, etc., with any hashtags, with any other contacts around you, with any funding links and the like. And I wish you the best of luck. I would be really happy to be in any communications and any future events or any future actions in regards to this. And I can't wait to see what the future brings.
Well, I can't either. I'm really excited. It's been such a pleasure to meet you. It's nice to see you because we've chatted on the phone, haven't we? But it's kind of nice to see people face to face.
You too.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Right, Sally Anne Burris. Well, thank you so much. Okay. A pleasure. Another great Philip Maloney podcast, if I do say so myself.
On a train, a bus, in a car on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife or with your dog. You can listen anywhere. You can listen everywhere. To the Philip Maloney podcast.